I was a police officer for 23 years, and for 14 of those years I worked undercover.
Their punishment for anyone that was sort of going against them was they were going to rape your sister and wife.
You know, he was the most vicious gangster in Nottingham. That cop would be snatched off the street, bundled into the back of a van and tortured to death. And then they come up the pavement behind me. I sprint, and I just get to the metal railing in time. And I reckon they were no more than 2 metres behind me when they put the brakes on. Yeah, that was a very, very narrow miss indeed.
Couldn't have been all bad, could it?
No, I think there was no good at all. All I did is cause harm to individuals and made society more dangerous.
Neil, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. First of all, it's fantastic to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Well, actually, that's a lie. I'm slightly groggy, if you can't tell. I'm slightly ill at the moment. I don't know whether it's coronavirus or not. I am getting a test later on, but thank God this is done remotely, right? Because we can afford to do it in that case. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm slightly under the weather, but regardless, I'm happy to have you on. A very exciting guest today. I pride myself on sit down to getting very interesting people, and you certainly are that. You come across like quite a humble person. Would you consider yourself extremely interesting?
God, I've no idea. Interesting is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
There's some people. Some people will excite some people and bore others. So
Yeah.
that's the nature of things, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, well, I consider you interesting. You've been an undercover cop, or you were an undercover police officer for, 14, 15 years, written 2 books about it, and sort of now sort of advocate the sort of legalization or rather the control and regulation, as you would say, of drugs. I've done my research, don't worry. So first of all, if we go back to the beginning, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into undercover policing and that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, it was by accident to a degree. You see, I was a really crap uniform cop. I was just not very good at it at all. I started as a naive 19-year-old, but I didn't actually realise I was naive until I was on the streets of Derby in uniform. I thought that you could reason with anybody, and I just couldn't understand why, whatever I said, some people still just wanted to punch me. So I wasn't very good. I didn't deal with conflict very well. I was a slow learner with lots of aspects of policing, and so I almost got sacked a few times. Any time in your first 2 years, you're in what they call probationary period, and you can lose your job very easily, and I almost did, but I hung on by the skin of my teeth, not particularly enjoying it. But then I moved to the north of the county in Derbyshire. Started working Glossop. I did much better there. I started to actually enjoy some parts of the job. But then I got an attachment to the drug squad. And the reason for that is because at the time, sort of 92, 93 in the UK, there was the mother of all moral panics about drugs. And that was about crack cocaine, because for years the tabloid newspapers had been running stories about the crack epidemic that it was predicting. And it was running stories about this for years and years before we actually even had any crack on the streets of the UK. And it was running stories about how it was destroying particularly black neighbourhoods in America. So when we did get crack, the public had already been whipped up into a frenzy of fear about it because of the way the tabloid newspapers had covered it. So this influenced policy. And it's a classic example of the reckless journalism damaging society by influencing policy in that way. So what happened is the Home Office instructed, feeling the public mood and following political rhetoric, they instructed all of the police forces to prioritise drugs, make it their number one priority, above domestic violence, above anything, and with a particular emphasis on heroin and crack cocaine. So this meant that the Derbyshire Constabulary wanted to share some of the expertise of the drug squad and get young uniformed cops to have an attachment with them, which the drug squad hated, by the way. They absolutely hated having these young cops turning up and didn't have a clue what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it was it's almost a hostile reception, actually. Like, we don't want you, just to make it clear, we don't want you here. But after a couple of weeks, one of them sort of looked at me and said, do you fancy having to go buying some crack? Which I thought was a strange suggestion. But, you know, I was young and game, so he gave me 20 quid, pointed me to this terrace door in Derby, blue door, as I remember, and knocked on the door and said, can I have a stone, please? And this guy said, who are you? You're not a student, are you? I fucking hate students. And I'm thinking, well, I haven't actually got a cover story here. What am I going to say? So I said, yeah, I'm a student. And this woman said, hang on, is he stupid or what? He's just said he's a student. and the guy said, yeah, but he's obviously too scared to lie, isn't he? So he's safe.
So
Go on.
was this completely out of the blue then? Because, you know, you say it was just some, you know, fellow in the drug squad said, do you fancy buying some crack? That's quite a severe, pressured situation to go into with no preparation, so no understanding of how, you know, the phraseology and terminology of the situation and how to buy, as you say, the stone. But also, no cover story at all. Was that a little bit reckless from the drug squad?
It was completely stupid. Yeah, it was utterly reckless. I mean, they did get an observation point. They got a camera in an observation point, so they could cover my approach towards it. But then I quickly went out of camera shot, so you know there was no genuine backup or coverage. And yeah, they said, well, they tend to call it a stone when it's just a ting. They call it a stone or a ting in Derby, and that's it. That was my training. And you know, here's 20 quid. Yeah, that was it. It was very reckless, very stupid. But then, I mean, you put it in context, though. You know, we are looking at this through a lens of hindsight. You and I, and anyone listening to this, because we know that marketplace of heroin and crack can be dangerous. We know that.
Yeah.
And to a degree, I knew that then, but it's substantially worse now. And you bear in mind that when I went to knock on that door, that dealer had no idea that the police were using that tactic, because the police didn't use that tactic. It was entirely new in this country. I mean, I'm not saying undercover work was new. Of course it isn't. It's, you know, high-end undercover work had been going on for a couple of decades, at least in the UK, since the 60s, in fact. But this low-level, starting at the ground level and working your way up, type of undercover work, what they called, but became to be known as level 2 undercover work. It just wasn't done in the UK. I mean, it was been done in the United States since the 1970s, but not in the UK. So he didn't know what was coming. So, you know, he had no particular reason to fear me or threaten me. Not really.
Yeah. You mentioned there that you were young and game, and you were a young 19, naive year old boy. And so what was your attitude going into this situation? Is this something you were looking forward to? You know, were you thinking, was there any sort of idea of the morality of the situation? Were you looking into it that deeply? Or was it simply, I want to make this police thing work, and so I'm just going to go and do it?
Yeah, I was just coming to the conclusion that I actually might want to stay in the police for a while, and actually did want to become good at it. And, you know, in my first 2 years, I was just thinking I'm going to survive the first 2 years just to prove it to myself I can survive it. And that was a difference in mindset. So yeah, I was approaching it and I wanted to become good at it. And this was the chance to do something developmental for me. And it was a challenge. It was something exciting. A little bit scary as well, which sort of appealed to me. You know, it's a test of one's bottle, isn't it? It's to see if one can do it. But in terms of the morality, you know, I had no idea. I mean, everything I know about drug policy in terms of the ethics of it, I've learned as I've gone on. I mean, I had a very simplistic, prejudiced view as a 19-year-old. You know, I soaked up the tabloid views completely, that, you know, I saw addiction as a result of someone making a stupid decision.
Right.
and lacking the willpower to get themselves out of a difficulty. I was judged people as inferior. If you were
Yeah.
addicted to heroin, you were stupid and inferior. That was basically the way I saw it, and it's not an unusual view, really, even now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had no idea at all.
So when you were going into that situation then with the idea, and obviously as things progress, these things go well for you and you think, oh, I might have a little bit of a place in this undercover work. With that attitude of, well, these people are inferior and slightly, they've just made a silly decision. And by the way, I must say that I respect you hugely in your honesty, because obviously in preparation for this interview, I've done a lot of research, and as I said to you before we went live, I've just seen your work prior to even doing the research, and you've always been quite self-critical of your work and very honest in the fact that you believe that what you did wasn't necessarily in the best sort of thing for the world and people, but I certainly think that, I just wanted to say that I respect that, because I think a lot of people can bury their head in the sand at times and think that, what I did was fine and go on and then just completely ignore that. So I just wanted to say that to you, that I certainly respect you for that, and that I don't want this to become, oh, let's all criticise Neil Woods for what he did for 15 years. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm sure you did, do it with the right intentions, and I'm sure actually to an extent you probably did some good to it. It couldn't have been all bad, could it?
No, I think there was no good at all to
Really?
anything that I did in my undercover work at all. All I did is
Wow.
all I did is cause harm to individuals and made communities more dangerous and society more dangerous.
Right.
No, there was literally nothing good at all. I mean, certainly in the first few years, I was celebrating and being self-congratulatory when I
Yeah.
managed to put some seriously dangerous people behind bars, and I did. Yeah, there are lots of gangsters got long prison sentences because of the work I did, and some of those people are genuinely vicious people. But it didn't reduce crime. That's the
Right.
important thing. It didn't reduce crime, and the reason that gangsters are more and more dangerous every year is because they respond to police tactics, and certainly the tactics that I was developing are a very important part of that increased violence.
Yeah. So how did it not reduce crime then? Because I've heard you speak about this quite a bit. How do you feel that putting these vicious gangsters, drug selling, at time murdering people away, how did that not reduce crime?
Well, it's important to note that police are really, really good at catching drug dealers. Really, really good at it. They are. If you give them twice the resources, they'll catch twice as many.
Yeah.
That's a given. But that's part of the problem. That's actually a cause of many of the problems, the fact that they are so good at it, because police can never reduce the size of the drug market, never reduce the size of it. They never reduce the demand, but they do change the shape of it. So police activity does change the shape of things over time. And this is because in order to understand this properly, you have to completely separate your understanding of crime. So normal crimes are affected by policing in one way. Drug crimes are affected differently. So if you arrest a burglar in a town, burglaries will go down because there is a limited number of people who are willing to commit that crime. So by arresting a burglar, you reduce the demand for that crime, so to speak.
Yeah.
If you arrest a drug dealer, you create an opportunity for 2 more or 3 more. And that opportunity is often fought over. There is violence involved in order to decide who's going to dominate that market. It's called the freelancer effect, which is noted by police all over the world. And police know this because they have their intelligence. They have their ear to the ground and their informants, and they know what happens after police what is described as a success. A successful raid, a series of arrests, a big seizure of drugs, whatever it is. It's presented as success, but it actually isn't, because generally violence goes up. And in fact, another interesting part of the freelancer effect is that it often increases consumption. Now, this is interesting because what happens is, people do settle scores by violence. Two dealers will fight over territory, but
Yeah.
often it's not by violence. It's often by a price war, like supermarkets. Supermarkets start having a price war, and they start doing bog offs, and that's what
Yeah.
dealers will do. That if a dealer wants to move into a town because there's an opportunity, someone's just been arrested or a team has just been arrested, they'll quite often do deals. And for heroin, that usually means you get 5 bags of heroin for the price of 4. Or
Right.
someone will sell you a point of crack, or give you a point of crack free if you buy 2 bags of heroin. So these deals are what establish the relationship between the new dealer and customers. And this actually sometimes means that consumption goes up, and you get an increase in overdoses as well. And there's a fantastic piece of evidence for this. There was the police in Switzerland. Some of the senior police were getting quite miffed at the suggestion that they weren't improving things with their policing activities for drugs.
Right.
So what they wanted to do is they wanted to do a before and after proof that what they were doing had an impact. So I think the city was Bern. And basically, the police there had intelligence that one family was dominating the methamphetamine market in particular. So the theory goes that they could take out this entire operation. They had the information to catch everybody. If they caught everybody in one go, it would shut down the methamphetamine market, and consumption would go down, yeah?
Yeah.
So they tested the sewage in that city beforehand to see the consumption levels, which you can do quite accurately. And then they tested the sewage afterwards, after a few weeks afterwards. And guess what? Consumption had gone up. Because of the freelancer effect, more dealers coming in, fighting over the new customers, doing supermarket-style bog-offs. And everyone's thinking, wow, don't mind if I do. It's like Christmas, isn't it? You go into Morrison's and they've got like 3 crates for the price of 2, and you think, well, don't mind if I do. And of course,
when you would have originally only bought one.
Yeah, when you would have originally bought one, and consumption goes up, doesn't it? Because supermarkets have bought in masses more to sell it cheaper because it's Christmas. So it's all the same market economics. It's all the same principles. But in this way, it's the police that are driving the change. And there's an interesting, and this is interesting because anyone listening to this will have heard this in the news themselves. When police announce or press release they've done some massive successful operation, they've done 80 warrants, they've arrested 100 people, they've seized kilos of this or kilos of that, whatever it is, they use the word disrupt. They say we have disrupted organised crime. We have disrupted the drug markets. Well, disruption is not reduction. So what success are they claiming? And there's an interesting comparison with the way that business leaders talk about this, because business leaders like Richard Branson, various people, they talk at conferences and they teach how to successfully expand a market. And they use the word disrupt. And they say disruption is the way to create market growth, because it creates opportunities, and that's where the growth comes from. So you've got business leaders saying disrupt to make a business grow, and you've got police saying disrupt because we think that's
to reduce,
because that's good. And it's not complicated stuff, is it? It's not even complicated, but the public are being hoodwinked, because
if it's this obvious, then Neil, what's the motivation for the police and the government to continue this disruption and to continue this line of work that they see fit?
Well, from government, government is wedded to the politics of prohibition, and they're very resistant to any criticism of it, because it's an established thing, and the reason that it's an established thing is because the public believe that it's successful. So you've got this catch-22 situation where the government instructs the police to carry out work within this policy regime. The police feel the necessity to sell what they're doing as successful, so the public believe it is successful, which feeds into the politics because the public are not ready to accept change. So
Yeah.
politicians, it's the way that democracy works. Politicians go where the votes are. So the only way that we will change the position of police and politicians is by social movement. And the same as any social justice issue through history, the issue is dealt with, or change happens through social movement, not generally through political leadership. So whether it's the social movement to end the death penalty, or
Yeah.
to end the criminalising of homosexuals,
Yeah.
whatever the social justice issue is, it's social movement that changes it. So you doing this and
Yeah.
interviewing me, you are a key part of the social movement. You're important in this whole thing.
So yeah, you say then, myself interviewing you is a thing that, we as the public can do in order to reduce this sort of, I don't know if you'd call it an epidemic, but, whatever it might be within the drug world. What can other people do that aren't necessarily interviewers or activists like yourself? What can people do in their everyday life maybe to contribute towards this social movement?
Well, if you, anyone out there, whoever I'm looking at, if you agree that drug prohibition is a disaster and policy needs to change, if you agree we need an evidence-based drug policy, if you agree we need to stop criminalising people who use drugs and that we need to take the power away from organised crime, then you are part of this social movement already. You are.
Right.
You are. Because if you believe this, you are part of that movement. But your responsibility is to persuade other people. Because it's the responsibility of all of us to make this social movement grow. So even if that's just your brother or your sister or you debate with your parents or whoever it is, you need to get people to vote where the most reforming policies are coming. You need to get people to just spread the word, to share this podcast, to get people to read the books, to follow the reformers on social media. Follow Leap UK, follow Transform Drug Policy Foundation, follow Release, and share everything that's put out on social media and try and engage with it. And that is how the social movement would grow. You don't have to be as active as us activists, but you just have to try and take a little bit of responsibility and do what you can. Oh, and of course, I always say this because this genuinely has an impact, I promise you, is write to your MP. Write to your MP and on any drug policy issue, whether it's the rescheduling of psilocybin for medical research, whether it's the support for drug consumption rooms, or whatever it is, on individual topics, if you can get into the habit of writing to your MP. I know a lot of members of Parliament, and most of them have said to me, the correspondence that they take the most notice of is when one of their own constituents takes the time to write to them or email them. They take notice. They do take notice of that.
So you worked with heroin and I believe crack quite heavily. Those were your sort of main drugs that you were dealing with throughout your career. First of all, before we go back to your career and really learn about some of the stories that you sort of went through, on your sort of regulation and legalization, that sort of thing on drugs and your stance on that. In regards to heroin and crack, because people can often make this argument for cannabis or marijuana, and we'll get to the racial sort of connotations of the labelling later. But people can make the argument for that, and a lot of people will be on board with that. But when someone says, no, regulate, and make legal heroin as well, people sort of go, whoa, heroin? No, we can't do that. What's your argument for as to why we should do that? And also, how do you see what's the image that you see happening, and what is this picture of regulation of heroin and crack look like?
Well, heroin is actually the easiest drug to regulate because we wouldn't even need a change in legislation in the UK to do it, because we used to regulate heroin really, really well. Up until the 1960s, if you had a problem with heroin, you just got it prescribed by the doctor. You got a clean and medical supply of it to make you as safe as possible. And we didn't have a problem with heroin until that system ended. When the British British system, as it was called, where people, it wasn't just heroin actually, it was heroin and cocaine. So this would also solve the crack cocaine problematic use issue. Um, when heroin prescribing ended, there were only 1,046 heroin users in the UK. So then the market was handed to organised crime because doctors were stopped from prescribing it. And 20 years later, we had 300,000 heroin users in the UK. And there's a very clear cause and effect there that happened because organised crime took control of that market. Now, if we prescribe heroin to those people who have a problem with it, suddenly the exponential incentive to find new customers disappears because the financial incentive disappears. And that's where we will get a steady and fairly rapid decrease of problematic use. Because once you bring people into the medical sphere, those people who are ready to have treatment to deal with their addiction or the wider issues that have caused their addiction, then of course they can do that because their stigma ends. They are no longer in fear of being criminalised, and taking care of people is a lot cheaper than punishing them anyway, because you could prescribe heroin to somebody even in the most expensive clinical regime, and it costs 12 grand a year. You send them to prison and it's 45 grand a year. So, taking the health approach is cheaper. It reduces crime in its broadest sense. So heroin and to a degree, problematic crack cocaine use is not that difficult to deal with. It's a matter of taking the correct harm reduction medical approach. Cocaine for adult use is probably the most difficult drug to regulate, as in powder cocaine. That is the most difficult one.
Why?
Because it's how do you regulate it in terms of dosage? Where would you regulate use? How would you package it? How would you prepare it? It's really difficult. I mean, the work is going on and exactly the best way to do that. And in October, I think on October the 22nd, there is a new document going to be published by those brilliant people at Transform Drug Policy Foundation. There's a new book coming out, which is how to regulate stimulants. So they will have the answer to all of those questions. They've published some things in the past which suggests how we do it. But I say it's the most difficult. That doesn't mean it's impossible, because the worst possible situation we have at the moment is the unregulated market, because organised crime can cut cocaine with whatever they want, so it's not the safest product. And of course, it's such a driver for international organised crime and the violence around it. South America is so unstable because of the international cocaine trade. Now, we know that policing can't reduce that, and we know that attempts at policing has increased the violence and the dominance of international cartels. So, even if the way that we regulate cocaine doesn't seem that attractive, it's still going to be better than the system we have now, because anyone who wants cocaine can get it now. They can. I mean, it's a bit of a media trope to say you can get cocaine in any city quicker than a takeaway pizza, but it's true. You can. And people are. You'll have it delivered to your door within minutes anywhere in a city. It's just not that complicated. Anyone can get it. And anyone in a pub, they're deciding they might decide at 7 o'clock they're not going to bother with any coke that night. They're just going to have 4 or 5 drinks, and then they meet up some friends, and suddenly it's a more party evening, and by 9 o'clock someone's putting the call in, but that's the way it works.
You walk through Manchester. I'm living in Manchester at the moment. You walk through Manchester, and I'm sure this goes for every city. Every 5 minutes, you've got someone coming up to you. Fancy a little bit of gear, lads? Weed, coke, and whatever. No, sorry, mate, no. But they're coming up to you constantly, aren't they? It's everywhere. And I've heard you say in the past as well that we're not going to get rid of drugs. We've got to learn to live with them, right? Because there's always going to be drug users. Now, it's whether those drug users take part in organised crime and that sort of. And as you said there, you mentioned there, your cocaine can be cut with X, Y, or Z, making it a very unsafe safe product. And I actually heard you speak about the fact that one of the biggest ways that drug dealers get away with murder is cutting the heroin with whatever it might be and making it look like an overdose, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly come across that in Brighton. That was the indication. That's the information I had. I can't say that for certain, but that is the information that I had that was happening. Yeah, so literally, criminals in control of these products is just, it should be unthinkable, really, because look how carefully we regulate our food or alcohol.
Yeah. What about guns? Like, dude, because I'm trying to make a parallel. This is literally just sprung into my mind, Like, if we, ban guns, and leave the market in the hands of the criminals, surely that's then similarly to the drugs. But then you look in America, and the whole legalization and some quote unquote regulation of guns is completely faulty, I think.
Well, you've hit on something very interesting there in terms of the international debate, because I'm part of LEAP in the USA. I'm on the board of governors for the governing board for the organisation there, and quite often the argument goes that the gun control lobby, the libertarian camp, for example, will use the same arguments about guns and drugs. They'll say, banning drugs doesn't get rid of them, and banning guns wouldn't do either. So they have that parallel, but that's actually a false parallel, because we have so few guns in the UK because we regulate them well, because we have very strict regulation, and we have had a series of developing regulation, or rather we have been able to tighten those regulations over time, because we've had a very rigorous regulatory regime for those guns. So we have better gun control than anywhere in the world, but that's regulation. So what I'm talking about is advocating control and regulation for drugs, because at the moment they are unregulated. Now, of course, there is the argument that there is an increased use of guns in the UK, and that some gun lobbyists, though we don't really have many in the UK, but some gun lobbyists would say that law-abiding citizens should have equal access to guns to the criminals, so that we can protect ourselves. Which it's a nonsense. Violence breeds violence, and
exactly.
And most gun deaths are in the United States are from people who legitimately own them. So that's it's a ludicrous argument. But then of course we bring it back to drug policy, because the reason that there is an increase in gun crime in the UK is because we have an unregulated drug market, and because we have growing violence in that market. Almost all gun violence in the UK is because of the illicit drugs market. So we're talking about the same problem with the same solution.
So you regulate the drugs market, you're saying, therefore you regulate the sort of violence and organised crime market, and so that gun issue doesn't even become an issue. I was on that topic then, again, I'm just playing devil's advocate for one, but also these points are literally just springing into my head now. With the regulation of guns, and you could relate this back to the fact that, all of these issues are there because of the drugs market, but with the regulation of guns, we've seen the extreme emergence of knife crime. If you were to regulate drugs, would you not see some form of window of opportunity open up there for some form of other drug or whatever it might be up here?
You suggested if there was regulated drug markets, there would be an unregulated drugs to take their place?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, because the evidence is that where people have a regulated product, they prefer that rather than going to the illicit market. Now, I'm not saying that fully regulated drug markets are a panacea, that they're perfect. They will be perfect, because you will always have some element of the illicit market. So, for example, we have a fairly well-regulated alcohol market, but we still have an illicit market. We still have people smuggling alcohol.
It would be far, far smaller.
But it's tiny in comparison. And actually, the smuggled alcohol market is only about saving money on tax anyway. In terms of the value involved, it's tiny. But no, I mean, where, for example, if you had a regulated MDMA market where
Yeah.
people know that you are going to buy a product created in a laboratory in perfectly regulated conditions, and you buy it in a blister pack. You know exactly how much is in the tablet. You've got all of the instructions in the packet, advice from the pharmacist. You know, if you've got that regulated product, what fool would buy an unregulated product?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that goes to a degree as well about, if you have regulated MDMA, then the other illicit stimulants would also, the demand for them would also disappear, because if people have a choice of, I don't know, illicit ethylphenidate
Yeah.
or a regulated MDMA tablet, well, they're going to give up the ethylphenidate because they can get some a regulated stimulant which does some of the things that they're after. I
Yeah.
mean, that it's a little bit of a generalization, but there is evidence that people will go towards a safer regulated product.
Well, the marijuana or cannabis, the illicit cannabis market in somewhere like maybe Amsterdam, in Holland, I presume it's tiny, right? No one's, moping about trying to get, cannabis off some fella around the corner when you can literally go to the shop and get it get it regulated, right?
Yeah, well, there isn't actually any regulation in the Netherlands. I
Right.
mean, what you say does have some truth to it. That the coffee shop regime that they have in the Netherlands has made the whole thing safer a lot better, because
Yeah.
people go to a premises where they can buy it, but they have this weird situation that the supply is still criminal. There is no
Right.
regulated supply still, so it's a bizarre situation in the Netherlands. It's far from perfect, but
Yeah.
obviously there is a lot we can learn from it. But of course,
Hmm.
in the Netherlands at the moment, there is discussion going on about regulating the market. So
Yeah.
we will see what happens there soon.
Indeed. If we go back to your career then as an undercover police officer, because I think this is so. As I started with the interview, it's such a fascinating story that you've got. I could listen to you all day about your experiences and stories, despite you saying that there wasn't any good in them. I think they're fascinating nonetheless. You go from that original task to buy some crack. You succeed. You buy the crack. You walk off. You're a happy young chappy. Where do you go from there then? How do you go from that into a full swing undercover police officer doing big busts that I'm sure you can talk about as well?
Well, I mean, that first day did define the next 14 years of my life, really, because quickly the drug squad realised that, wow, we're onto something here. We can get quick
Yeah.
results and we can get lots of arrests. And there was a lot of pressure to get the numbers. There was a lot of pressure to prove that the constabulary was doing what the Home Office required of them. So I went from sort of a few days undercover to a few weeks, and in no time at all, it went to several months. And the reason for that is that, people went to prison, they knew there was a new tactic involved, and so they got more and more careful. So I had to spend much more time developing a legend, developing a backstory, and working much harder to get my face known within wherever I went. So I ended up travelling all around England and spending no less than sort of 6 or 7 months in any city centre doing the work.
Yeah.
So and there's still no training. I mean, I helped develop the training for other people in about '97, I think. So I've been doing it for about 4 years before there was any training.
How would you say there's hardly any training and that you've helped develop the training, going into a situation where you basically have to create an entire, well, you've said in the past you don't want to create an entire new person, do you? You want to play a sort of alternate version of yourself. What is that like, creating that cover story? And you must be, have you ever considered a sort of job in acting at all? Because like, you can stick to that very well, Neil, I must say, because otherwise you wouldn't be here probably.
Well, this is where it's sort of hard to explain, really, but I wouldn't be a very good actor, I don't think.
Right.
But then most actors wouldn't necessarily be very good at undercover work either, because it sounds daft to say, but it's an entirely different skill, because you can't act a part as an undercover cop, because you'll get found out. If you're acting the part of a different person, that you're being a different person in a play or in a TV series or something, you're playing that role for a set period of time. and then you resort back to who you are. You can't do that as an undercover cop because you don't know how long you're going to be in a community, how long you're going to be with people. You'll get found out because of the pressure situations, and your natural responses to pressure situations will unpick your persona if you're pretending to be someone completely different. So you have to be very close. You have to be yourself, but a different version of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's often hard for people to get their head around. But
Was your cover ever almost blown at all?
yeah, I mean, I had it was blown completely once in Leicester. It was sort of due to the incompetence of the people running the job, actually, because there were two undercover operations going on between, and the detective inspectors who were running each job were rivals. They didn't like each other. And one of them decided to go to the strike phase before my job was finished. So the word was out that there was UCs about. And so I went into this situation where basically one of the big targets that I'd been buying heroin off, he was thought to be quite a well-connected gangster, but we couldn't for certain identify him, and we didn't have any corroborative evidence because it had been about 4 months since I'd bought any heroin from him, and I wasn't wearing a camera at the start of the operation when I did so. So we need to get some camera footage of him, but he wasn't coming out. He was sending other people to deal. He was taking a step back. So I decided to, because I knew he loved clothes, I decided to get some counterfeit clothes and offered to sell them to him. So that's what I got him out. So anyway, I met him in this car park, quite near the city centre in Leicester, near the inner ring road. But it was quite a secluded car park, sort of weird, sort of within the city, but really secluded.
Are you scared at this point, by the way? You've got like a massive drug dealer here. Like, if that was me, Neil, I'd be absolutely bricking it because he's a bad man, or he's a scary man, not a bad man. So were you scared at all in any of these situations? But before you continue that,
Not going up into it. No, I was quite happy. I mean, the thing is,
relaxed.
you have to. I mean, by this stage, I've been doing the job for 6 months. That particular operation was 6 months, and if you're nervous every day, you'll get worn out very quickly. So you have to find the ways of being very comfortable and relaxed. And I doubt my heart rate raised at all until I was in a genuinely dangerous situation. But so I arranged to meet him, and I had these Stone Island jackets, counterfeit jackets, which I'd got from customs, and. But the trouble is, he brought some mates with him. He brought these two mates because they wanted to look at these jackets as well. Now, whereas I knew him and he was happy with me, and he'd literally known me like months. The other two were a bit suspicious. And anyway, he comes to me and says, "Look, do you just want to sell me these jackets, or are you after something?" So I'm thinking, well, if you've got some white, I'll have some white from you. Yeah. So he gets this massive block of crack cocaine. It's like bigger than a box set DVD case. And he sits in the front seat of it, and he's peeling back the cellophane, and he's cutting with a razor blade this little slither off the end. Yeah. And anyway, his mate then suddenly pushes me up against this fence and starts picking at my clothes and checking my clothes. And he actually found the camera. Oh, now, we're not talking James Bond tech. Once he'd found this because it was like a denim jacket with a metal, old-fashioned metal button, and there's a hole in it with a little camera staring at him. There's no doubt what it is when you found it. It's blinking at him. So he says, "Fucking hell, man, you are and all." He is, man. He's fucking heat. He's fucking 5-0, man. He's 5-0. Like he's old enough to have seen Hawaii 5-0, but so I'm thinking. I was in the corner of a car park, and I'd got a long way to go to escape. And I knew that if I was to try and run, I wouldn't be able to get away. These were big athletic people. And I was probably going to die here. Yeah. So but I thought what I needed to do is to create enough doubt in his mind, and most importantly, for him not to convince my mate who was sat in the car cutting crack. I had to make sure he didn't persuade him of who I was. So what I did is I just launched into this torrent of abuse. I just said, "You're fucking picking up my clothes. What the fuck are you doing? It's not even my
Yeah.
fucking jacket. It's Jackie's jacket. It's not mine.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're on about." And he's just like, "Wow, I didn't expect that."
Yeah.
And he just didn't get a word in edgeways. And I just, honestly, saliva's pouring out of my mouth as I'm spitting out
Yeah.
swear words at him and, just abusing him. And I took the jacket back off him or off his mate, and I started folding it really slowly. I thought, got to be as slowly as possible here, but keeping up this torrent of abuse. And I'm
Yeah.
putting it in the plastic bag and started to walk across the car park, still looking over my shoulder and shouting abuse. And he's just like looking at his mate like, what? Because he's genuinely doubting himself because one part of his brain knows what he's found, but it can't compute with the way I'm behaving. So
Yeah.
I just keep walking. I'm thinking, go slowly, go slowly. I remember thinking, if you run from a wolf, the pack will chase you.
Yeah.
So anyway, eventually I hear these footsteps behind me. And I think, oh, here we go. And I'm thinking, like, I'm about halfway across. If I can swing round and get a punch in, a really, really good punch, then maybe that'll give me enough time to run and escape. So anyway, I'll zip round. And it's the guy with the crack. He says, "Don't mind my mate, he's a dickhead." And I says, "Yeah, he is a dickhead. And he's just been picking at my clothes and I don't know what he's fucking going on about." And his mate is now screaming at him saying, "Man, he's 5-0, I'm fucking telling you." And he's like, "Nah." And he gives me this crack and he says, "Yeah, there's the ting. Don't you want the ting, man?" So I'm saying, yes, I'll get the 20 quid out and do the exchange, and it's all in the middle of the camera, get the crack, put it in my little key pocket and start walking off and say, "You want to sort your mate out? He is a dickhead."
Yeah.
And anyway, I walk into the edge of the car park, and obviously his mate by that time has convinced him that actually they're in trouble here because I'm actually got a camera on me. And then I hear the screech of the wheels, and it's rubber burning. It comes screeching across the car park, and there's no other car parks in this space either. They just come straight across. So then I start running, and then I get onto the pavement, which is where the inner ring road is, and I just start sprinting towards this roundabout. So they come onto the road, the dual carriageway, zooming, and then they come up the pavement behind me. Right. And where you get a roundabout, where you've got two lanes coming up to a roundabout and the footpath, you get like a metal railing which separates the roundabout from the footpath.
Yes, yeah.
I sprint and I just get to the metal railing in time because the car can't follow me because of the railing, so it screeches to a halt. And I reckon they were no more than 2 meters behind me when they put the brakes on. So, yeah, that was a very, very narrow miss indeed.
And if you would have been found there, would you just been straight up killed?
Oh yeah, they were trying to kill me. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's and after that, you thought, "Yep, back to work the next day." What? Did that not ever make you just want to stop?
Well, it's a weird thing, I went back to the secret location, the debrief place, and obviously gave them the car registration number and the description of the people. The intel guy went away, came back, and he said, "Wow, I don't know why they didn't just shoot you." And he's laughing. He says, because there's loads of intel, there's a gun in that car. These are proper tasty people,
Yeah.
And, people were all like, "Wow, yeah, you did that really well. That was great." And, from my ego's point of view, I'm thinking, wow, I'm the kind of person who can
Slip these guys.
Who can deal with that kind of stuff. I'm someone who can think my way through this calmly, and I'm really pleased with myself. I think, wow, I am good at this shit.
Yeah.
And, and it spurs you on, and you start to believe your own legend a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was full of myself. I thought, great, I tried not to be cocky about it, but I'm thinking, yeah, I like this. But the thing is, I've had a cost since because, that event and many other events where I was in serious danger has damaged my mental health. Now I am diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's quite complicated as well. So I might have been quite pleased with myself at the time, but there is lasting harm to these things.
Yeah.
And the institutions, the police institutions still don't understand the extent of the damage that undercover work does to people. And it's still going on. And there's still reckless disregard of the long-term impact of undercover work on police, even where they don't have life or death situations. This is a massive, massive psychological strain, and it causes damage.
What about the undercover work? Again, if you don't have to answer this, but what about the undercover work is it that affects your mental health in that way?
Well, it's multifaceted, really. I mean, from my point of view, the thing that's caused me damage is not just the near-death experiences and all the risks I took, and the fact that was exacerbated by incompetence or corruption from the police side. Is also the harm I caused to other people, which I justified to myself at the time, but in retrospect, I feel intensely and irrationally guilty about. Even though I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, I still feel guilty with the harm I caused to people. So it's complicated because, when you spend so much time manipulating people around you, and invading their privacy, that is an extraordinary psychological strain.
Yeah.
And people still are not. They don't get this. The people. I've been in people's houses and they see me as one person, but I'm not. I'm a spy in their camp. And that's damaging for them, and it's damaging for the person doing it. You only have to look at the spy cop scandal. I know it's not drug policy. It's not my normal sphere, but the spy cops, which is about the Mitting inquiry, the people who the police officers who infiltrated political groups and had relationships with women who thought that they were other people.
Yeah.
That's caused horrendous harm to the women involved, but it's also caused harm to many of the cops, I believe. I mean, the person who was the whistleblower for that, great hero of mine, Peter Francis, he's also diagnosed with PTSD, and he's had quite a severe case of it over time. And he's never had any near-death experiences. He didn't have any genuine risk when he was doing his work, not really. He was infiltrating anti-racist groups and spying on the Lawrence family. He wasn't in danger of physical harm at all that you would normally associate as the cause of PTSD. But for him, it's that ongoing strain of being a spy, being a person invading other people's privacy, and the constant mental strain of that.
Were you able to have like a personal life at this time? Because, well, my first thought then after that incident that you just told about in Leicester is, first of all, you'd be paranoid beyond belief because these people are surely now after you. But second of all, I've heard you, again, in previous interviews talk about, like, I think it was the Burger Bar boys say that their punishment for anyone that was sort of going against them was they were going to rape your sister or wife or someone like that. Were you able to have relationships with people or get close to anyone at the time? Because, if you were to get caught or anything were to happen, something might happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, I still managed to. I mean, the kind of undercover work I did, level 2, is not as it's not as completely immersive as level 1 undercover work, where people live away from home for much longer. But I was away from home maybe sometimes four nights, something like that. But I would manage to factor in days off and build that into my cover story. So I'd quite often still manage to get home and take my kids swimming on a Sunday morning. I'd still have some measure of home life. But I mean, it took its strain sometimes, obviously, because sometimes the week could be just exhausting. And I was just exhausted on the days off. But no, I did have some normal life, and I obviously my family and people I knew didn't know what I was doing.
What was your cover story for them?
I was doing some covert work, but I wasn't telling them that I was undercover buying heroin from gangsters, put it that way.
Yeah. You said there that you felt bad. One of the things that gets you now is just the fact that you've just made people's lives worse to an extent. That's your words, you know, that you've made just all these people's lives, these vulnerable people's lives worse. One of the people that I've heard you talk about is Cammy, quite a bit. Could you tell, for the people that don't know, could you tell people about Cammy and what your relationship with him was like in that situation?
Yeah, so wherever I would go, and this came into the training actually in the early 2000s, a word for this kind of person. And I think that, as far as I know, they're still called a conduit. They're called a conduit, and they're the person that's used strategically or tactically manipulate because they're useful to get you introduced to other people. So this is what I would do. You know, I would look for the vulnerable people in whatever town or city I was in. And I looked for the vulnerable people for a couple of reasons. First, because they're the easiest to manipulate. They are. Vulnerable people are easier for me to, you know, my job is to manipulate people and get them doing what I want them to do. And secondly, they're useful because the most vulnerable people tend to be using the most drugs and they know the most people, you know, they've got the biggest connections. So one of these people for the Nottingham job was Cammy, and he was useful to me because he was on bail at the time for dealing heroin, and he was connected on the very fringes to an organised crime group, the Bestwood cartel, that I needed to get information about. So Cammy was perfect for me. So I spent ages winning him over, you know. And the way that I won people over and manipulated them is what I call now is weaponizing empathy.
Right.
Because I would get to know people, I would listen to them and I would understand them and feel what they were feeling, you know, and that's how I learned about people's lives. And so, like many people, I heard about Cammy's childhood, you know, I listened to him about the difficulties in life and quickly understood why he was a problematic heroin user, you know. Most people who are problematic heroin users are self-medicating for childhood trauma. You know, that's a academic fact. There is plenty of studies to prove that. It's not just an opinion. So with Cammy, it was obvious why he was problematic, and I spent so much time with him. You know, I gave him presents. I remember once I gave him this new baseball cap, and the old one which had holes in it and stuff. And he said, "Oh, thanks, man. That's amazing. I needed a new cap." And threw his old one in the bin and put his new one on and checked out his profile in the sort of reflection in a shop window and stuff. And you know, I got really friendly with him and I liked him.
Did you like him? Yeah, I was gonna say, do you like him? Was he your friend?
Yeah, I liked him. You know, he was fun. He made me laugh. He did. And we went shoplifting together, which was great fun. You know, if you know you're going to get away with it, shoplifting is a laugh. You know, if you know you're not going to prison, of course. You know, get out of jail free card. So I spent a lot of time with him, but of course, at the end of the operation, he was arrested because he'd been committing offences on bail, and part of my records was evidence against him, you know, as well as against other people. So he was arrested. Now, when he was in police custody, he ended up being on minute-to-minute watch, suicide watch. And the reason for this, as he told the interviewing officers, is that he thought I was his one friend in the world, like literally the one person that he had found he could talk to and trust.
Yeah.
And for him, who was already traumatized and struggling to deal with that, you know, this was the last straw for him. There was just one last thing, and he became suicidal. You know, and that hit me like a ton of bricks. That was horrible, but there's lots of Cammies, you know. There's lots of people out there who I have just trampled all over, and this is what undercover drugs policing is. It exploits the vulnerable people and causes great harm.
Yeah, I mean, is he still in prison, Cammy, or do you know? Have you ever had any contact with him at all since then?
No idea. One day I'm going to go looking for people, but I can't just yet. Time's not right. But yeah, one day I plan to go and search these people out.
Yeah. Have you ever wanted to quit then? Because have you ever thought no? Because I was going to ask, when did the penny drop? Was it when you had finished? Did the penny drop then that it wasn't the right thing, or did you quit because you didn't feel it was the right thing, or what happened there?
No, I eventually quit because of Well, it's complicated. I mean, the trouble is when you invest your expertise and invest in a particular thing that you're doing, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that it might not be right. So
Yeah.
so I sort of had strong inklings that things weren't right for quite a few years. And the thing with Cami
Yeah.
was one example of that. And in fact, I
Yeah.
did actually quit undercover work because it was after that. I thought this is too much
Oh,
emotionally. But I
right.
was persuaded back into it a few weeks later, so I went back into it. Um,
Right.
but so it took many years for the penny to drop for me to
Mm.
completely accept and understand, you know, what should have been telling me years before, really.
Yeah.
Um, but for a while, I thought, well, I'll stay in the job and try and change things within. I stopped undercover work, tried to influence the policy through the drugs experts system, but it wasn't working, and eventually the PTSD caught up with me, partly
Mm.
because I still felt trapped in a system that was causing harm. I was still part of that system, and so
Yeah.
my mental health went downhill drastically. I went off sick from work, and then I realised I just couldn't. I had to be out. I
Yeah.
had to do something outside the police because there was no changing the system within, um,
Mm.
and that was one of the things that helped me sort of start to deal with my mental health problems, I think.
Mm. On then, you mentioned the fact that you were shoplifting and you had that get out of jail free card. You obviously did you have to take drugs at all? And because these people must be like, take that or else you're 5-0 or whatever it was you said, UC. When you did take those drugs, if you had to, I have always wondered, keeping your cover story is probably relatively difficult. You have to be fairly on, when you're sober. How are you managing keeping your cover story when you're off your head on whatever it might be?
Well, never took heroin, never took crack. I
Right.
never needed to. I
Mm.
pretended to a couple of times. I remember I was once in a car, and I knew I had to make a show of something because there was a dealer who was suspicious. Who was sat in the back seat over my left shoulder.
Mm.
So I cooked up. I cooked up with my spoon. Put some of the bag in the spoon. Put the citrus in. Put my water in from a little bottle. Uh,
Yeah.
Heated it with my lighter. Put the filter in. Put it sucked up into the syringe. Tapped the syringe. Tapped the bubbles out. Waited for it to get to body temperature. Dropped my trousers as if I was going to go into my groin.
Yeah.
And then injected it into the car seat.
Oh.
Um,
How did you manage that? How does that happen? You're sitting down and you just miss just by a bit
yeah,
and then you
yeah,
sort of can't see.
yeah.
Oh
He couldn't
wow.
see where I went. So I did that once. I once pretended to receive a blowback of heroin as well from someone else blowing it, and I
Right.
just didn't inhale. And it was like I just hoped they didn't notice the fact that all the smoke was coming out the
What?
side of my mouth.
Because you were scared of because you were scared of the drug, or what was the reason that you didn't do it? Well, I know that might sound like a silly question, but if you're doing X, Y drugs, why did you draw the line at heroin?
God, heroin's terrifying. It absolutely scared me.
Yeah.
These people, you build a tolerance up very quickly with heroin, and people that are using it regularly have got a tolerance. I
Yeah.
didn't have a tolerance. I had no idea what was a
Mm.
safe amount for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
no, heroin was a very scary thing. I mean, crack wouldn't have worried me at all. It's very
Mm.
difficult to kill yourself with crack.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have bothered me at all. But I never had to. The only time I had to use, I used cannabis, probably 3 times, that's all.
Right.
But once I made a really bad mistake, really bad.
Okay.
I was doing this operation in this pub in Leicestershire. It wasn't heroin and crack particularly this time, although there was some. I did buy some crack. Um, it was. I made myself out to be a connoisseur of amphetamine, which was
And what is a connoisseur of amphetamine?
well, somebody who really likes quality product. They prefer their base. They prefer
Yeah.
their base methamphetamine. They like their dextro tablets. They like,
Right.
they like the quality amphetamine, the quality uppers.
Right.
So
Okay.
so I was making myself out to be this expert, this connoisseur, and clearly I'm not.
Yeah.
But it was something to talk about. Um,
Yeah.
Anyway, this main guy in this pub, literally the main gangster in this pub, came to me one day, and I'd been there. I'd known him a few weeks, and he came to the pub and said, "Hey, you, got a present for you." And he bought me this bag, and it's this sort of pink, toxic-looking goo in this bag,
Right.
and you could almost see it dissolve in the plastic. And he basically gave it me, and the trouble is, he picked up on like a momentary reticence on my face. You know,
Yeah.
just the very brief passing thing, and
Yeah.
I knew because I saw the very brief passing
Yeah.
suspicion on his face that there was a problem, and that problem had occurred in a split second. So I
Yeah.
knew I had to pour water on that fire so it didn't
Yeah.
develop, and the only way I could do that was show some enthusiasm and have some of this base.
Yeah.
So straight away I'm like, yeah, okay, got my finger in, a little bit on my finger, stuck it in my mouth, and he said,
Yeah.
"You'll need more than that with your tolerance." I'm thinking, oh shit. So I put my finger in again and I put it in my mouth, and within minutes I felt the sort of glowing warmth in my belly, and
Was it nice?
no, it's disgusting. No, I could,
Right.
could almost feel the mouthfuls of burning in my mouth. It was,
Oh.
but it was proper base amphetamine.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time, the average amphetamine on the market was 5% pure, between 5 and 7%.
Yeah.
This was 40%,
Oh.
and it was a lot, and it
Yeah.
was terrible. I'd had a large dose, obviously, for someone with no tolerance, and so it was horrendous. I made my excuses within the hour and got out because I was increasingly a complete mess, like a gibbering mess. And dictated some of my evidence, but I was quickly. It was quick. I was not in a good place. I was really, really anxious. It was too much amphetamine.
But how? So you say you're the guy who gave you the present picked up on that split second of slight hesitation from you. If you're a gibbering, anxious mess when you're high, how is he not picking up on the fact that this guy's not acting like he should do?
Oh no, I made my excuses and said, right, I'm going to go
Right.
party, essentially.
Oh right.
So I
Yeah.
left. Now, that was a gibbering mess when I got back to the debrief. And
Oh.
I was with my
right.
cover officer and investigators, and they were like very worried about me. They said, "No, we need to get you to hospital. Panic! You're going to overdose." And I'm thinking, "Well, no. I know enough about the drug to know that, it takes a lot to overdose on amphetamine. It takes a lot, and I knew I wasn't in any risk of that. But I also knew I was not going to be in a good place because I'd had too much.
Yeah.
So I just need to go home. So I had to be driven home. I think it was about an hour and a half away or something. So I was a gibbering mess in the car, still going up as well, getting higher by the minute. And I remember being driven back thinking, I've got 8 cans of Stella in the fridge. That's going to take the edge off.
Yeah.
And I got home and I had 8 cans steadily, and it made no difference at all. I couldn't eat.
Did it make it worse?
I just couldn't feel the alcohol at all. Just not at all.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sleep at all for 2 nights. I didn't sleep properly for the third. That's how much I'd had and how long an impact it had on me. It was horrible. Mind you, my house has never been so tidy.
What because you were just up all the time?
Yeah, it was just like full of energy. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'll tidy, hoover up. Yeah, I'll polish shelves, dust shelves. Yeah.
Fair enough. You talk about your colleagues there who were worried about you. Obviously, police and members of the police, we like to think that they're all do-gooders and people that are doing good. And even though what you say you were doing was bad, you still had good intentions in your mind. That's all you were doing. But some people in the police don't have good intentions, and corruption within the police can be quite a prominent thing. Was it prominent? Did you see a lot of it? And what is corruption within the police like?
Well, again, it's important for people to realise that almost all corruption in the police is because of drug policy. Right. And one way that was clearly emphasised to me in retrospect was the fact that the whole system that formed in terms of the tactics and the way that I did my work was designed to protect me from that corruption. And the very existence of those protection measures shows an institutional awareness of that corruption. And what I mean by that is that wherever I went around the country, the cops that I worked with weren't allowed to know my real name. So I used my cover name to the cops as well as the gangsters.
Right.
And before I got there, those police officers that were going to be my support network, you know, the intel
Yeah.
guy, the tech guy, you know, whoever it was, they were instructed to not ask me what my real name was or where I was from, and that they
Right.
would be disciplined if they even asked.
Wow.
And that was to cocoon me from the corruption, which obviously
Existed.
you know, but this is the, you know, I didn't really understand the full implications of that at the time.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, the implications are that the police institution accepts
There is
the
corruption.
endemic nature of drugs organised crime
Yeah.
corruption. Because otherwise, those measures wouldn't be in place, would they? Because they're not in
Yeah.
place for any other form of policing.
Yeah.
They're not.
Did you ever come across a corrupt policeman where you thought you're dodgy, you?
Well, yeah, in the same job that the Nottinghamshire job in which Cammy was involved,
Right.
he got an introduction to me to one of the to a gangster I'd been after for about 4 months, and I got this introduction, and it was a really difficult day at the office, so to speak, because this guy interrogated me with a knife pressed into my groin,
Oh no.
which is not very comfortable. I can tell you.
No, I can
It's
imagine.
not. You just don't want to feel a blade there. You
No.
really don't. But the next day, you know, we'd all been working very long hours, and the next day, 2 of my backup team went off sick. So I was introduced to these 2 new cops, and this was about 8 o'clock in the morning. We had to do an early start for some reason. Anyway, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Meet these cops. Shake the hand of one of them. No problem. Yeah. Shake
Yep.
the hand of the next one, and then the hairs went up in the back of my neck. I mean, it's just on
Wow.
an instinctive level. Everything about this guy was wrong, and I knew that instantly. You know.
How? Just instinct.
It's just instinct, you know. When you're working undercover every day for so long, you know, your senses and awareness of body language and facial expression, whatever it is, they're just really finely tuned. You know, you're in survival mode where every little nuance is something you have to be aware of for the sake of staying alive. So
Yeah.
so you know, you get really sensitive to it. So I mean, I sort of worked out afterwards when I was reviewing my own response that the body language specifically I think I was responding to was the fact that when he shook my hand, he purposefully looked down to the ground and away to the side instead of meeting
Right.
eye contact or
Yeah.
avoiding eye contact in a normal nervous kind of way. There was something very
Deliberate.
there was something guilty about him. So anyway, I there was no way I was going to relax with this guy knowing what I'm doing. So I didn't want him in the briefing. I didn't want him part of the job. So I went to the boss of the job and said, "Look, boss, there's no way I want this guy knowing what I'm doing." And he was great. He didn't even blink an eyelid. He said, "Fine, no problem. We'll exclude both of them so they don't ask any questions, and we'll just tell them to park up outside the city all day." You know.
Yeah.
So they were excluded, so they never knew what was going on. Now, it turned out that my instincts possibly saved my life, because it turned out that that guy was an employee of Colin Gunn, the gangster who was in charge of the Bestwood cartel.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was the most vicious gangster in Nottingham. And only a few weeks before that, there was intelligence came into the operation that Colin Gunn was letting everyone know that if he caught an undercover cop, that cop would be snatched off the street, bundled into the back of a van, and tortured to death. You know, he was.
And
he
what
was,
sort of torture? Just what sort of torture do you think that would be?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, blow torches used to be the thing that people talked about at the time, but
Wow.
you know, you never know. Gangsters like to be inventive sometimes. You know, to outdo their competition.
Yeah.
But you know, that was the environment in which I was operating at the time, and he was working for Colin Gunn. But the important thing to note here is that he wasn't corrupted while he was in the job. He was paid by Colin Gunn to join the police.
Right. So he had a clean record.
Yeah, a clean record, and he joined the police. He was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses for good information. Now, in the debrief for that event, I spoke to senior police, and I spoke to many senior police since. But at the time, the senior cop said to me, "Well, Woodsy, yeah, we know this happens. Of course, this happens. With this much money involved, how
Yeah.
could it not happen?" And that's important to note, that this kind of corruption only happens because of the prohibition drug policy.
Yeah.
And that's not just because there's more money in drugs than there is any other form of criminality, which there is. It's
Yeah.
because that the way we police drugs makes corruption more likely. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, when police do catch dealers, what they're doing is getting rid of the competition. And whoever
Yeah.
steps in tends to grow their share of the market, which means they become bigger monopolies. And in so doing, by having a bigger share of the market, they become wealthier, which means they have
Yeah.
more disposable income, which they invest in corruption. And why wouldn't they? Because investing in corruption protects them. It's what makes
Yep.
them safer. If you've got bent cops, you're safer than if you haven't. So of course,
Yeah.
you're going to do that. What gangster wouldn't aspire to having police in their pocket? Which is,
Yeah.
So the mechanism of policing actually causes corruption. Policing
Yeah.
drugs, that is.
On the other side then of police sort of immorality or inadequacy, we touched on it earlier, the sort of systemic racism that exists within the sort of drug, what would you call it, the sort of drug game, if you will, the drug regulation within the police. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? How systemic is this racism? How is there racism within sort of the drug policing world?
Well, the thing is, drug policy has always been about racism. The reason we have our drug laws is because of racism. And it started in the United States. We didn't have a drug policy like the United States until after they made us have it. And the
Yeah.
reason that the world has American drug policy is because of the Second World War. Every nation on earth came out of the Second World War poorer, apart from the United States, because everyone else owed the United States money.
Right.
So the United States got richer, while everyone else was struggling, which meant that the United States became a true superpower and could dominate world policy. And
Yeah.
in particular for drugs, they used the fact that they controlled everyone's debt to force through changes in drug policy. And the reason that they have a punitive drug policy is through racism. And that's because of the end of slavery. The southern white dominated institutions didn't want to accept that. And, part of that is the Jim Crow laws, the continued persecution of black people. But drug policy was another way of persecuting
Just an
black
excuse.
people. Yeah. So there was the use of cocaine was seen as no problem at all. Middle-aged mothers might use it as a remedy. Some people use cocaine, just like some people drank booze. There wasn't
Yeah.
a problem. You got Coca-Cola and other tonics with cocaine in.
Yeah.
It wasn't seen as a problem. It was only seen as a problem when it was seen as a tool to persecute black people. And that's where cocaine was made illegal, because of that. It was used. It was a tool to put black people in prison. The same with opium. Opium was used again by middle-aged white women, no problem at all. But when it was seen, when Chinese workers who had been imported to build the railways, when the railways were finished and they were seen to be stealing white jobs, opium use was seen as a way to persecute those people and arrest them. Same with cannabis in the 1930s, the Great Depression. Mexican people were seen to be stealing white jobs. So what was seen as foreign behaviour was criminalised, and it was a way of arresting and enslaving Mexicans and putting them in prison, essentially.
And it was named marijuana then at that point, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. And that's why they called it marijuana, to make it sound more foreign, so they could more successfully persecute foreigners. So essentially, worldwide drug policy happened because of an aggressive American foreign policy to make people do what they wanted, but it was basically them exporting their own domestic racism. So it's in the DNA, it's everywhere, and it plays out in the DNA, because drugs, Drug laws are about persecuting other people, other people's behaviour. So where that plays out within policing is that police see the other people. No, I'm not saying that it's conscious, active racism. I'm saying that it contributes very heavily to the unconscious bias, because most stop and searches, 70% of them are about drugs. So the more activity you have, more contact you have between police and the public, then then there is more opportunities for that racial bias to play out. And in drug policy, it's extraordinary that the figures, around the UK, you're at least 10 times more likely to be stop searched for drugs if you're black than if you're white. 10 times more likely. Then if you're caught with drugs, you're 4 times more likely to be charged as opposed to cautioned if you're black, as opposed to cautioned. More likely to be cautioned if you're white. And then if you're stood in the dock waiting to be sentenced for a drug crime, you're more likely to get prison sentence if you're black than if you're white.
Yeah,
so
mental.
I was never that good at maths at school, but that's exponential racism.
Unbelievable. Neil, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. It really is. I think it's been a fantastically productive chat, and we'll make sure to get all your links to your 2 books in the description, and all your social medias and things like that, so that people can continue to follow your journey. And if they believe in what you're saying, they can continue to pass on. You can pass on that baton, if you will, and everyone else can share that responsibility in trying to make what you're saying happen. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you have enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week. Ta-da!